Good evening and welcome to our regularly scheduled Select Board meeting, August 1st, 2023. It is now 7:03, so we will call this meeting to order. Let us all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to take a moment this evening to recognize the passing of Susan McGuire on July 23rd. The Select Board would like to send their deepest sympathies to the McGuire family. Susan served on the Select Board as a member and also as a RTM for the town of Walpole for over 34 years. She volunteered in numerous capacities, including 8 years on the school committee, permanent building committee, finance committee, capital budget, and she was extremely active as a member and former chairperson of the Council on Aging and co-founder of the Friends of the Council of Aging. Susan was dedicated to the Walpole community and to supporting seniors throughout the town, ensuring our seniors had access to the best program and services made available to them. Susan believes behind a lasting legacy, and her passion, commitment to the town, and the work she has done will continue to have a positive impact on our community. Our deepest condolences go out to the McGuire family as we send our thoughts and prayers. I'd like everyone to take a moment to stand as we recognize Susan and have a moment of silence in her honor. The first item on the agenda tonight is to continue the discussion from our July 18th meeting on the request of Oshnick Realty Holding LLC for a lodging lighthouse permit license at 81 Diamond Street for 5 rooms and common areas. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the number of letters that we have received from neighbors concerning the application. But it's essential that the Select Board continues to hear from community members as they reach out. We've taken the time to read all of your letters that have come to us, and it's important for us to continue this discussion. During our last meeting, we allowed 3 to 4 neighbors to speak, and although a public hearing is unnecessary for a lodging house permit application, I will again allow 1 or 2 members to speak this evening. I ask that individuals that may come up here to speak to the board speak only for 3 to 4 minutes and not to repeat but bring new information to the board. This can be an emotional discussion when matters concerning a change or that could occur in a neighborhood, and we ask for respect for the process and allow the Select Board to deliberate and have thoughtful discussion on this matter. Tonight, Town Council will be joining us via Zoom to assist in further questions we may continue as we continue to go through this process. Good evening, Greg. Can you hear us?
Yes, good evening, everyone.
All right, great. Jim, did you have anything that you wanted to add to this?
No, just I think Greg's weighed in on this one. I think an open dialogue is what we need, and hopefully we can figure something out tonight.
Okay. Greg, I'm going to ask you to speak on this matter for a moment as we go through this application process and to really kind of review the reasons that the Select Board could possibly deny a lodging house permit.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So the Select Board has the authority to license facilities for the use of lodging houses.
Hold on, Greg. I'm having a little bit of a hard time. I'm going to give Patrick a minute to adjust. Are we good? All right, try again, Greg. We just want to make sure we were getting a little feedback on our end.
Okay, thank you. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, great. So the Select Board has the authority to regulate lodging houses in accordance with the General Laws, Chapter 140, Sections 22 through 32. And although it's a matter in which the board has discretion, the Supreme Judicial Court and the Massachusetts Appeals Court have found that discretion is limited to only regulating certain areas, and that general grounds of adverse impact on the neighborhood are not a proper ground for denying a license. But that instead, the board can primarily consider 3 things: whether or not the facilities are adequate for the proposed use, whether the applicant has a has an adverse or improper record of running other lodging houses, and or whether there will be lack of supervision, or that the supervisors are unqualified. So in your review, my recommendation is that you look at, the qualifications of the owners and the measures that they're going to take to ensure that the premises are properly run. And the general laws, require that certain things be done, like keeping guest registers and having certain fire safety procedures and features in the building, so that they can ensure public safety and that the premises do not become an area of high crime. And so in conducting your review, in my opinion, you have the authority to grant the license subject to certain conditions that will ensure that the premises are operated in a way that is safe, and in a way that does not cause a nuisance or a threat to either the safety of the residents or the safety of the neighboring properties. And in that regard, I have suggested a number of conditions that the board might wish to consider if it is going to grant this license, and I'd be happy to discuss those with you at the appropriate time.
All right, great. Thank you, Greg, and I hope everyone in the audience was able to hear that and understand that. I know it was the volume was a little off still on our end, Greg, but I'm going to give people the opportunity, a few members, to come up and speak to it, and if they have further questions too, that we can, as we continue the discussion. Mr. Crowley, would you mind coming up too to kind of provide an update to the board? I know since we last spoke, they were set for a few inspections to occur. I'm not sure if those did occur, if they were delayed, but if you could give us an update on your end.
Yeah, so Jim Crowley, Building Commissioner. We were out at the lodging house last week. Electrical passed, plumbing passed, rough frame got a partial pass. He has to reframe an extra wall for the apartment upstairs, because at the moment when you come down the apartment, you actually egress into the lodging house. They have to be separated, just through building code is the requirement. So they were putting in a wall this week, I believe, but he got a partial pass on our side, and Mr. Yaba hasn't booked in this week yet, but if it be this week or next week, we'll be going back out for a frame, and if that wall is up, he's going to get the rough frame to continue doing the insulation.
Okay. And with the framing and separating, that was part of the original plan and still allows for what the plans that were sent forward was for 5 rooms.
Yes,
Right.
5 rooms were approved originally. I believe Mr. Yaba is thinking of adding an extra room, which we stated he needs to give us a whole new set of plans and reconfiguration, so we can do a full code review on that.
So go from 5 to 6.
6. Yeah, I don't know if Mr. Yaba has decided to do that. That was his suggestion, that he was thinking of reconfiguring a common area into an extra bedroom.
Okay. Can you just remind us too, as we may have some new members of the audience and people listening, about the zoning that is there for the limited manufacturing and how a lodging house would fit into that?
Yes, so it's the property at 81 Diamond is a unique property. Probably 80% to 90% of it is at 81 Diamond, and across the road between Diamond Street and Old Diamond, there was a parking lot that was with that premise. The parking lot itself is in residential, but the building that we're describing where the lodging house is going is LM District, Limited Manufacturing. He does have a factory use in the basement. One is a countertop manufacturing, and the other is a machine shop. He does have an approved caretaker's unit on the 2nd floor, and the lodging house is going to be going on the 1st floor. It is in the LM district, which lodging houses are deemed allowed as of right. They do obviously have to come before this board for a licensing, but they fall under the same category in LM as lodging house, motel, or hotel.
Okay. Does anyone of the board have questions for go ahead, Glenn?
Any of the businesses that are located on site subject to being licensed by the town?
No,
No, they're all.
it's just regular
allowed.
business license. If they'll have to be registered through the clerks if they're not an LLC. Other than that, they have to be registered through a business license. But
Right, but
the
then
town-
none of the businesses or anything that we oversee
No.
on the select board. Thank you. Could I just call your attention, unfortunately, it's an anonymous letter, but there's a number of concerns that were raised in the letter that was sent to the select board. And it goes on for a few hundred words, so, there were just a few things that stuck out to me that you might be able to help me understand better. It appears that the letter is from neighbors on Diamond Street and Old Diamond and in that area. One of the concerns that's raised in the letter is that the property is being used, there's probably 3 or 4 concerns that I wanted to ask you about, but the first is that the property is being used as a transfer station. So can you speak to that? Is that allowed? Is that a problem? Is that something that you've seen?
So yes, I know the neighbour that complained on this. Originally, earlier on, when they were doing the work in as an office building, the building itself has a 40-foot buffer that has no parking, no leaving dumpsters, containers, anything in that 40-foot buffer. When they were working on the building for the offices, one of the neighbours noticed and sent us some pictures of some of Mr. Yaba's employees bringing debris from other jobs that he was involved in and were dumping them on site, which is not allowed anywhere in Walpole. Your dumpster is to be specifically for the project you're doing.
Got it.
So we did write violations to Mr. Yaba to tell him to stop bringing any debris from other jobs, and because he has a trailer that he uses and he had a dumpster there, and he had trucks that were coming by these employees and dumping them into the dumpster in the trailer.
Yep.
We sent him violations, said this is not allowed and that he had to stop it or we'd be fining him.
Was it a one-time thing, and after the violation,
And it happened, I believe, 3 to 4 times.
So when it happens 3 to 4 times, was there a violation for each of those times?
Yes.
So do we know if it's going to continue? I know you can't speak to the, maybe that's a better question for the applicant.
Well, just from the point of the violations, we sent out the violations and it has stopped.
Okay.
And I've got no calls from that neighbour or any other neighbour probably in the last 6 months or so since it stopped.
You answered the question that I meant to ask. I'll ask the applicant if it's going to continue. Thanks. Thank you for answering that. Can you address, there's the question here of unregistered junk vehicles with flat tires and no license plates parked on the property. Can you address that?
I believe we had one phone call from the neighbour. There was a trailer parked on the residential side that had the back of it open, that was full of old timbers, mattresses and discarded material. The neighbour filed a complaint about having a truck that size, parked on residential property, and it was opening to the elements, which under our code falls under attractive nuisance.
Okay.
Which again, we talked to Mr. Yaba, got him to move the trailer and clean it up.
Okay, and that's really what I'm getting at, is I want to make sure it's not a recurring problem. If it happened once, people make mistakes, maybe they didn't know the rules, you tell them the rules, they say, okay, now I know the rules, and they don't repeat it. So, that's more, it's not so much that, these aren't egregious violations. Having a junk vehicle on your lot isn't the worst thing in the world, but once you're informed about it, and if you fix it, I think that's important. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. If you see a trend here of sort of these problems continuing, or maybe if you bring it to his attention and they stop, which is what you just said, that's kind of what I'm getting at. So thank you. The last question, and I don't know if you could address this or not, is about the forklifts being driven on the street, because I understand that he owns a piece of land across the street from Diamond Street where his location is. So can you address that? Is that allowed? Are you allowed to cross this? Probably, yeah, if it's licensed.
Yeah, so that I can't speak to because we've never got actually any phone calls
Okay.
on it, so I can't speak to that. I've never seen it,
Okay.
and I've never got any phone calls on that.
Okay, great. It's a long letter, but those are the things that stuck out to me that I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah, we spoke to Mr. Yaba. We usually try and do verbal warnings at first. Again, we don't try and hit people with violations and fines straight away. So
Sure.
the few times it's happened, we've given verbal violations, then we get written violations, and then if it happens again, we go to fines, and we build up from there.
Got it.
But since we got to the fining stage, again, the last 6 months, I've had no phone calls or spotted anything that's been going on.
Understood. Thank you. I'm all set. Ellie.
Jim?
So just a couple quick questions, Jim, thanks. So I understand that lodging houses are allowed by right within a limited manufacturing zone, so I got that. I think a minute ago you also said that would be different if it was an apartment house. Did I hear that right?
Yes, so in LM districts, apartments, single unit condo style are not allowed, any residential is not allowed in LM. Lodging house falls under motel, hotel, which is transient, which is allowed because they're a special license, so hotels would not be allowed in a residential area, motels would not be allowed, they're only allowed in LM and industrial. The only residential part besides the lodging houses there is an apartment on the top floor. That was approved back in, I believe, the 90s through the zoning board as a caretaker's unit.
And so that's
That
grandfathered.
it's not even grandfathered, it actually got approved, so it's there by right. So it wouldn't even be seen, if it was grandfathered, it would be considered non-conforming.
I gotcha.
But it actually was approved by the zoning board, so it is a conforming use.
And they wouldn't be allowed to do that today?
Not today, no.
Okay. So then, the question I have is, trying to draw the distinction between an apartment house and a lodging house, and what makes one or the other, and therefore allowed by right if it's a lodging house. So, can you tell me what's the distinction that you draw there? How do you decide it's a lodging house versus an apartment?
So an apartment, again, one is the use where it's allowed, and an apartment, again, it can be up to the number of people that rent it and do it as a lease, as a common unit. So if you and two of your friends rent a unit in a residential area, you're allowed to rent it out. It's a lease, usually, again, for a year. You can bring people, there's not as much restrictions. When it comes to lodging house, obviously he needs a license, but he also falls under Mass General Law requirements, which require him to have a registry on file at the lodging house. He has to have a lodging manager there. You can rent it from weekly to monthly to yearly. It's up to the owner how he wants to rent them out. And you're basically renting a room, similar to a motel or hotel, with a common kitchen area. But your room is your private room. When we go to our inspections, unlike if we had to go out to if someone was doing a apartment building, we can go through the apartment building. With a lodging house, we do the common areas, and we check for the license with fire, health, and building, and he has to renew it every year. He also has to have a cleaning service in there. There's also some stipulations that if any of his tenants are breaking the law, or it says egregious behaviour, the owner of the lodging house is actually punishable by fines and up to a year in prison as well. That's where residential, if the tenants wreck your house or cause trouble, they actually get in trouble for it, you do not as the landlord.
So I think the distinction, if I could boil that down, the distinction is the common area. So an apartment facility doesn't have common areas for things like kitchens. A lodging house doesn't have a kitchen in the room that's being rented. The kitchen is in a common area used by all lodgers.
Yes, and you're only renting your room
Yeah.
plus the common area. In an apartment, you can go to any other room you want to, within reason. But an apartment, in a lodging house, you're literally physically renting a room. And you're paying it, again, it's a weekly payment, a monthly or yearly, and it's a register that can be maintained by the police. Can call there at any time and ask for the registry book. And under law, Mr. Yaba has to have an up-to-date registry. It's also in his purview, and it's by law, under 22, section 22 to 31, that he has to check everybody's ID and prove they are who they are. And if they're not who they say they are when the police look into it, he actually can be held liable as well, between fines and jail time.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's really helpful to draw those distinctions. And just back to the question of a lease, because in an apartment, there would be a lease. Hotels, motels, and presumably lodging houses, there is no lease.
No, sir.
So there's no lease involved here.
No, it's just a weekly, again, it's paying you either,
Okay.
it's up to the owner, he can decide to rent the rooms weekly, monthly, or yearly. That's the kind of significance of a lodging house. The slight difference is transient. So a hotel, you can't stay more than 90 days in one room. You have to move out of that room or move to a different room in a hotel. Motels are longer, and then lodging houses themselves are longer by definition. You can rent one room for longer than a 90-day period.
I gotcha. Okay. All right, that's helpful. Thank you.
Greg, do you have anything to add to that question?
I think he's on mute.
We lost you.
Everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
So by the way, some of the feedback may be caused by the fact that I can see myself, being mirrored back from the WMTV, prompt. But anyway, so if you have any trouble, just let me know. But no, I agree that was a very accurate and thorough explanation of what the difference is between a rooming house and an apartment. The two primary features being that the rooming house is primarily you're occupying just a room, and that you're sharing common areas, living room, kitchen, with other strangers. And in an apartment, you have a lease and a right to occupy for a certain period of time, whereas a rooming or a lodging house is more transient and guests tend to stay for shorter periods. It is more similar to a hotel motel than it is an apartment.
You know, we can just hear you, but there is a little bit of feedback, so hopefully we'll continue to work on that. Does anyone else have any?
Good.
You're good, Jim?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jim. I did want to provide the opportunity for one or two neighbors, if there's anyone that would like to come and bring new information to the board. Okay. As we continue our discussion, there were some areas of concern, and Town Council Greg, you have helped address and have reviewed some of these areas concerning security, record keeping of occupants, plan for maintenance, overall property management, park conditions, nuisance conditions that could impact the neighborhood, and inspections to occur by appropriate departments as required. The lodging house permit, although approved by the select board, police, fire, health, and building departments are all actively involved and require numerous inspections on an annual basis for this as well. Do we want to go through each area briefly? Is anyone else?
I'm comfortable with each of the areas. What I'd like to make sure of is that Mr. Yebby is familiar with each of the areas and that he understands what the implications are for this short-term license that renews, I think, in January.
Yes.
And so forth, so.
So, Mr. Yebby, would you mind coming up? Because we also did want to give you an opportunity to speak tonight as well. Is there anything that you would like to bring to the board that is new from our last meeting? I know Jim gave us an update on the inspections.
Yeah. One of the board members recommend, I think, Mr. Wafer, about doing something in that buffer zone, some sort of landscape. So I did start putting a plan together to do something in that area, just to kind of clean it up, put some benches and things like that. So, and I did start last week doing some landscaping on the house right next door to it, 71 Diamond, and I'm going to continue right into 81 and just do some sort of like little sitting area kind of thing, and some landscaping up against the building as well.
Good idea.
You know, one of the things I did want to say is, as far as my experience, right now I do have a manager in my company, and right now we manage over 15 units, both commercial and residential, so we do have a background with tenants, not with lodging, but as far as keeping up with properties, vetting who we're bringing into our apartments, and we haven't had any issues with that. So we do have experience with rentals. As far as the letter about the, back when we had some problems with the garbage and things like that, in the beginning, there was a lot of demo. We did have a dumpster out front, and we are in the remodeling business, and a couple of our guys did, they'll come back with some debris. There's a dumpster sitting out there. They would put the stuff in the dumpster, and we did correct that. At this point, there's no need for a dumpster in front of the building because it's pretty much the whole exterior is finished now, and the inside, as Mr. Crowley said, is ready to insulate and board up the walls and plaster. So we don't really I just keep my mobile dumpster out front right now for some of the debris that we collect, but that was back in the beginning when there was like major demolition going on. One of the other things I wanted to mention too is this lodge is a little different than I think other lodges where each of the rooms, and I am going to do 5 units, not 6, 5 rooms, not 6. But each one of these rooms has its own bathroom, so they're not sharing a common area bathroom. Each room has its own private bathroom. What they are sharing is a common area kitchen. So, that's going to bring a better tenant. It's going to cost a little bit more money. It's not going to be like a $300, a month lodge or anything like that. I mean, we're going to ask for a premium, anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500 per room, because they're going to have their own bathroom, and it's going to be kind of a, the kitchen, what we're going to have in the kitchen, and the finishes and stuff are going to be more upscale. That's really all I had to add.
Okay, and you answered one of my questions, which was the 5 or 6 rooms, so that is good to hear. So again, we were working on some of the areas of concerns that we had brought up, which I mentioned, and we do definitely want to let you know that this permit is renewed annually. So this initial permit that is something that we have been, discussing and working on would be from August 1st to December 31st. So it is going to be very important. You've heard concerns from the neighbor, you've heard our concerns as we go through these areas, that you comply with these conditions. As Mr. Crowley went over the requirements for a lodging house, they're quite extensive, and as the owner of the lodging house, there's certainly some ramifications that I think you're very much aware of now, and he has explained it.
I've been studying on the consequences if you don't, I understand how to run the lodge.
And so some of the areas, again, being that this is going to must comply with the conditions set forth by the Select Board, the police, fire, health, and building inspections, as well as annual inspections. Violations concerning a lodging house, if found by the Select Board and given notice, there's an opportunity for a public hearing that is to be provided. And at any time, the Select Board may suspend, modify, revoke, or not renew the license in the future. Town Council, do you have anything else to add? You have worked with us on the draft of some other language.
Through you, Madam Chair, would you like me to go through each of the requirements in the proposed order? As I mentioned earlier.
I think it would be helpful if you did a briefing, yeah.
Okay. But the purpose of these requirements are to incorporate into the license the rules and regulations of the other licensing boards, the Board of Health, the Building Department, the Fire Department, to make it clear that if this building is not being maintained in a manner that is reasonable and safe for the residents and the neighbors, that the Select Board will have the authority to revoke, modify, or not renew the license. Other conditions make it clear that the guests are required to behave in a way that is suitable to the neighborhood, so that it incorporates the provisions of the general laws that there has to be a register kept, and that the register has to show each occupant's true identity, that there'll be security cameras installed in certain places, and that loitering outside in the parking lot will be prohibited. It will ensure that someone is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that if there are any problems, there is somebody who can be there and respond to those problems and keep people safe. At the end of this is to make sure that there are house rules, and that those rules are posted in prominent locations and given to all of the occupants, so that everybody understands what their obligations are as residents of this facility.
All right, thank you. I do feel at this time that the conditions that are set forth in this letter concerning the security, record keeping, plan for maintenance, property management, parking conditions, nuisance conditions that could have an impact, and inspections to occur by the appropriate departments that are required is sufficient. At this time, is there anything else that the board would like to discuss, Jim, and work on?
So just as a follow-on to that, so I assume you've read all of the conditions and that you agree to them?
I do agree to them, yes.
And you understand what both the chair and town council have said about if you violate any of those, we can hold a public hearing and modify or
Yes, I
take
do
away the
understand.
license and so forth. You also know that it's an annual approval, which means it's up for renewal when?
Every December, it's January 1, the new license would begin, so every
So
December.
in 4 months, it's up for renewal. And so it's very, very important that you follow all the rules that you're agreeing to, not just the rules of being a good neighbor and all that, but you got all kinds of things you're agreeing to, and you gotta make sure they're all there.
Yes.
There is also that good neighbor category, which is, even though it's not written down, if it's something that is going to be detrimental to the neighborhood, I would hope that as a good neighbor and as someone who wants to be part of the fabric of the neighborhood, that you would resolve whatever that issue might be immediately. So it sounds like you agree, you've read
Yes,
it, you understand it.
I did.
You know what could happen and all that. Okay.
Yes, I did, I agree.
Okay. As I've thought about this, and as town council has said, there are 3 reasons that we could turn this down. One is the facilities are inadequate. It doesn't appear as though that's going to be the case. Now, obviously, Jim Crowley, the fire chief, the police chief, and others are going to have a say in that as you go forward building this out and, of course, maintaining them. But that doesn't appear to be something that we could say is you're not doing. Bad record in running some other lodging houses. Well, you haven't run any other lodging houses, so it's hard to say that. I would just want to ask you very directly, in the apartment houses that you run, have you had complaints from any of your tenants? And if so, what are those complaints?
I haven't had any complaints, just if something like an oven's not working or something like that, or faucet's leaking,
Yep.
something like that, but no complaints. I've got tenants that are actually have lived in the apartments for over a year, long-term tenants that are happy. So as far as complaints, we haven't had any.
And I did do some internet searches on that question to see if I could find it on my own. I couldn't, so I would admit that. But clearly, that's something we're going to be wanting to pay attention to. And then the final one was the question of the supervisors and the supervision that takes place within the lodging house, including maintaining compliance with all those rules that you're agreeing to. Again, it's hard for us to know as we stand here right now, whether that's an issue or not, because we're not there yet. But that's something that clearly we'll be watching. So you got a room full of people here from Diamond Street.
I've got my mother here from 71 Diamond Street,
Yeah, I
right
know.
across the street, so she's the biggest watchdog of the whole,
Well, that's good.
she just moved in there this week, so.
My point is that I'm sympathetic to the concerns of the neighborhood. Being sympathetic to the concerns of the neighborhood doesn't mean that we can turn this down. We have to follow the rules ourselves. And so I don't see any reason that we can turn it down, but I am sympathetic to the complaints, to the concerns that are being raised by the neighbors. And I believe our board is, others may chime in on that. I think you just need to be aware that concern, will manifest itself in having you come back in front of us if things start to deteriorate there.
Yep, understood.
All right. Thanks, Ally.
Yeah, I would just, follow up on what Jim said. I understand that the neighbors are worried and concerned about this, and I completely understand that and appreciate all the letters that were sent. We got a lot of letters. I think these conditions will tighten up what can happen there and give it sort of boundaries, rules, things that will be followed. And I would just say to all of you who live in the neighborhood or anybody who's at home listening, if an issue comes up, my suggestion is the first thing you do is you call the owner and be on record as to what the issue is. And if you don't feel like it's being resolved, reach out to the select board, because this does follow under our purview, and we will be taking this up again in December to renew the license in January. So I would say you have that open door, reach out first to the owner. If you don't feel like the right things are being done, reach out to the select board, and we'll look into it. So, I think that's a reasonable ask from my point of view. We would like to stay in the loop if there's issues, so don't hesitate to reach out. You can always reach out to us directly on email or reach out through Aoife. And, she gives us notice, if anything comes in today, she'll let us know in the same day. So feel free to do that, and I encourage you to do that if there's an issue. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, that's definitely fair.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Okay. I think at this time, are we ready for a motion?
Sure. I would make a motion to approve request of Ashnick Realty Holding LLC for a lodging house license at 81 Diamond Street, subject to the applicant obtaining all inspections and complying with all conditions as outlined in the written decision.
Do I have a second?
Could I just ask one? You mentioned that you were going to only do 5, not 6 apartments. Are you willing to put that in writing?
It's in the.
Oh, it is, okay.
It's
Okay,
already
good.
approved,
I'm
yeah,
sorry, I
that's-
missed that. Okay.
So I seconded that.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? We have a vote 5-0-0. All right. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody,
Thanks.
for coming in.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is for a Class 2 dealer license.
Guys,
Good evening.
I'm Jefferson Costa, owner of AP Auto Group, and I'm here today filing for a Class 2 dealer's license.
Aoife, is everything in order?
Yes, so we haven't seen one of these in a while, but maybe a year or two ago, you approved something similar. They're going to have no in-person sales or vehicles for sale at the property. It's mainly a wholesale business that they're doing. They currently have a repair shop there
Yeah.
with an office, so the plan is now to only bring the vehicles there for repair, do the sales through the auction and online.
Yeah, yeah.
So we, as you know, through zoning, if they were to have cars for sale at the property, they would need a zoning decision. So they're aware that if they do decide to go down that route, that they would have to go that way.
Any other questions from the board concerning this? All right. Ben, do I have a motion?
I'd make a motion to approve the request of AP Auto Group LLC for a Class 2 dealer license to operate at 1171R Main Street, Bay 2, with the condition that there is to be no in-person sales conducted at that property.
I'll second that.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have a vote, 5-0-0.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
Good luck.
Next on the agenda tonight is Patrick from our Community and Economic Development. We have a few things to go over this evening.
Hello, members of the board. So I do have 3 topics to go over. I believe the first one tonight is kind of an update on where we're at with the MBTA requirements. I think we have, yep, there's Tyler. So just to provide a little bit of introduction and a kind of background, as you know, Walpole is one of the 175 communities that has to comply with the MBTA multifamily zoning requirement. So since February, we were fortunate enough to receive a technical assistance grant through Mass Housing Partnership, working with the Barrett Planning Group to look into modeling as well as possible zoning recommendations of a potential district. So I've asked Tyler to be here today, Tyler from Barrett Planning, to kind of provide an overview of some of the modeling work that he has done for us in terms of looking at a district and seeing where we are. So at this time, I guess I'll defer to Tyler.
All right, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, so thanks for the introduction, Pat. Madam Chair, members of the board, pleasure to be before you this evening. My name is Tyler Marin. I'm a senior planner with Barrett Planning Group. And as Pat said, for the past few months, we have been engaged in helping him and the other staff with some technical assistance, mostly working with the state's compliance model to try and figure out the ways that Walpole could comply with the MBTA community's guidelines. So I am going to give a brief overview of our modeling efforts, For tonight, I'm going to initially not go super deep into, the background of the law, super deep into the technical stuff. I just want to keep it a brief overview. Obviously, if you have further questions for me, I'm more than happy to answer. All the information I'm going to be discussing tonight is found in a couple of technical memos that we've provided, Pat, over the course of this project. So without further ado, I've got some visuals to show you. I'll start sharing my screen and I'll go over what we've done so far and what remains to do in the next couple of months before this grant runs out at the end of September. Right. Right. Thumbs up?
Yep, we can see it.
Yep.
Okay. I've learned to always double check. Things go wrong too often. So, I'm going to give a brief overview as to what the town's requirements actually are. The community is required under the MBTA communities law to have a zoning district that is at least 50 acres in size, and allows multifamily residential development by right, which is to say, without a discretionary permit. And the regulations must be such that under zoning, a density of at least 15 units per acre measured district-wide is allowed by right. And there's also a certain number of units that the district has to be able to allow without getting too deep into the weeds. You're not required to actually build all those units. You just have to provide the opportunity for the market to build that many units. But the main thrust of this compliance model that we're working with, which is largely an Excel model, is to put in the details of a proposed district and to have it spit out, based on the parameters that, the state has decided, does this meet, does this check all these boxes? And so for Walpole, the final piece of that is the unit capacity is 1506, and we can just call that 1500 going forward. And the only other major requirement that will be relevant is those 50 acres, that 1500 unit capacity. 3/4 of that has to be within the half-mile radius of a transit station. This is the MBTA community is designed to be sort of a transit-oriented development program, so that is sort of the rationale behind that. We just have to make sure that a majority of those acres and those hypothetical units would be in that station area. So this is a map. Again, this is a map that the town has as part of a memo, but this is just a brief summary of all the different areas and configurations of districts that we modeled. And I'm going to briefly go over all of them. As you can see here, most of our thinking has been in and around downtown, and the major reasons for that are, one, that's where your commuter rail station is, and most of it has to be in that radius anyway, so it makes sense to look there. There's already a decent amount of multifamily development, so that's an area where zoning for that would be more in character as opposed to some other random location. So the first inclination when we first met with Pat and the other staff was, okay, let's see what our central business district looks like, as a potential basis for an MBTA communities district. So one thing I want to be clear on is we're not recommending you tweak the zoning of the existing area. Our recommendation to all of our clients that we're helping with this MBTA communities compliance is to go with an overlay. That way you can superimpose the specific MBTA community requirements on an area without having to worry about combing through your existing zoning with a fine-tooth comb and picking out things to change. And also, in a lot of cases, communities like that underlying zoning and don't want to fundamentally change it. And so an overlay is just additive, adding another option. So if you were to put an overlay district that complies with this law in this area, your underlying community at central business districts, would not go away. And in fact, in discussions with town staff, we sort of came to the idea that, in fact, the multifamily that you allow in the central business district currently is pretty permissive in terms of density. That's tied to other things like providing commercial space. I believe the residential density you currently have in that area is tied to a formula based on the amount of commercial space that a developer provides. But in all likelihood, the result of that would probably be a better deal for a developer than the minimum requirements for an MBTA communities district. So I bring that up because in the initial round of modeling, we just wanted to approximate as closely as we can the boundaries of the existing central business district. If there's a few tweaks here and there, that's to make sure it runs along parcel lines. But one question we really wrestled with was for MBTA communities, you cannot require mixed use. And that's a potential problem in this area because obviously this is your commercial core. So we went back and forth about different ways to address that. I mean, it's also a good place to encourage multifamily, but currently you do that through the avenue of mixed use. But to have a district that complies with this law, there has to be an option to do some multifamily that meets the requirements by right without the requirement for a mixed use component. So we went back and forth with a few ways to try to ensure that the ability to create a mixed use project in this area is not compromised and to encourage it as much as possible. And I think that the most recent thing we landed on was if you actually compare this to the density bonuses currently in your zoning bylaw for providing mixed use, those already seem enticing when compared to this, so it may not even be an issue. That's sort of where we've landed right now. This initial set of modeling, just focusing on this district boundary, like I said before, the dimensional regulations provide a good amount of density, so it actually does not take a lot of tweaking to get the required 1,500 units. The biggest note that we got from staff when we brought this memo to them was this central business district area is about like 62 acres. So when you put in the required 1,500 units into an area that size, you get a density much higher than the minimum. So the instruction was, well, if we have this slack, so to speak, to spread out the density a bit, what would a larger district look like with the same number of units spread across a larger area that maybe hews closer to that 15 units per acre density? So the second round of modeling, that was the main question we set out to answer. What would that look like? And so, a few months later, this is the two major scenarios that we looked at. In consultation with town staff, we identified a couple potential areas to explore. So the first one, you see here on top is this orange blob right next to this sort of yellow and red blob. This yellow and red area, you can ignore the distinction between yellow and red for now. That's left over from a route that we ended up not pursuing to its conclusion. But basically, this yellow and red area is the existing central business district. And the thought behind this scenario is, well, let's add some adjacent parcels, excuse me, until the district is larger, and that'll spread the density out. And then the other idea was to pull a site in from elsewhere in town. It's okay for pieces of the district to not be contiguous as long as they're not too small and all the other requirements of the district are met. So you can have a piece or two here and there. So the parcel that staff suggested we look at is the Walpole Mall parcel as a potential, redevelopment site over, the next near to medium time horizon. So both of these scenarios can definitely be made to comply, but they both have sort of the same issue, and that is that one thing we really want to leave you with, and with all of our MBTA communities clients with, is with our modeling to illustrate like the base minimum scenario. Like, what's the minimum the town will have to do to get the minimum number of units and the minimum density? And it's okay if, a town wants to get ambitious and go over that number, if they want to, roll other, development initiatives into this, kill two birds with one stone, add an extra, add a extra chunk of the district that might add, 500 extra units. I mean, that's okay to do. But our thinking is that I think pretty much every town is going to want that like baseline of this is our minimum requirement, whether or not they feel ambitious enough to push past that. So neither of these scenarios were good for that. And so the stage we're at now is making some final tweaks to have a couple of like fully thought out final scenarios along these same lines as these two, but hew closer to that 1,500 unit minimum and that 15 units per acre minimum. So just to explain why these don't work in that way, this orange piece is just too big. It's like 120 acres. At that point, the district would be so big that to keep your head above that minimum density, you'd have to add like hundreds more units. So that can't work as the minimum scenario. But what we're doing with the town staff is just identifying the lowest priority parts of this to just take those out, and then we'll find a happy medium between, just the core central business district and this very large district. Find that medium point. And then the reason we can't use the mall very effectively for that minimum scenario is it goes back to the fact that 75% of these units have to be within the half-mile radius. So that works out to be about 1,100. So there has to be at least 1,100 back in the central business district. So, and this Walpole Mall parcel, in the model, it yields quite a few units. If you, even with relatively modest multifamily dimensional regulations, it's going to push way above that 1,500 when combined with the 1,100 you have to have elsewhere. So again, if the town likes either of these two scenarios, that's fine. But we think it's valuable to, show those minimums, regardless of whether you use them or not. And I think the sense we get is that a lot of towns are, starting by putting forward that minimum scenario to the public to, see what the temperature is on even that. So that's another thing. You have to be mindful that what we're giving you has to be useful for, bringing to the public, because this is regular zoning that has to be adopted at town meeting through all the regular processes. So before I move on, just a note on the dimensional regulations. You'll notice that I have not really got into those too much, and there's two reasons for that. One is that both of these scenarios are still going to have a little tweaking by the end of it, and so I imagine the dimensional regulations will probably get tweaked as well. So if I went into detail on them tonight, they'd be different probably by the end of the project. And then the other thing is that they're fairly flexible. Like, we found a way that made sense to us as planners to get there, and our approach is to try and keep as much similar to the existing bylaw as possible, like especially in terms of building height, the lot coverage, major things that will really affect the character of the site. We try to keep those as close as possible, but what we show in the memos is not the only way. Like, for example, for all these scenarios, I think in terms of parking spaces per unit, because the model does account for the space you'd need for parking, I think we're generally in the model recommending like about 1.5 spaces per unit. And we know, that can be controversial in some towns. So say, for example, hypothetically, that, in the case of Walpole, the town pushed back and was like, no, it's got to be 2 per unit. We don't want to compromise on that. So, well, we could go back and adjust that, but then we'd have to, change the, I don't know, the amount of open space, or just tweak the height a little bit, just make up for that lost area that's now going to parking. So that's the case for most of these regulations. Like, we can really, like, as the public process goes on and you get a clearer sense of what dimensional regulations are really the most important, those can be tweaked. And I imagine that in the process of actually writing this zoning, they probably will be. So that's where that stands. Again, you can see all the details of what we used in the memos if you are so interested. And so I'll just talk a bit about what's left to do, and then I will turn it back over to Pat and the board, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So like I said, we want to revise this upper scenario here, this orange bit, to try to get some boundaries that work better. Staff's working on getting back to us on that. And then I think in lieu of the mall parcel, I think there was the suggestion the last time we met with staff to use some other area in East Walpole, and Pat had recently provided some data about where exactly we should focus that. So there's a bit more modeling work left to do. I imagine we'll produce another brief memo and some maps to go along with it. So the town will have a complete record of everything we've done. And then the final task is, while we are not scoped to actually write a full new zoning district for you, we're going to try our best to leave you with some useful zoning recommendations, pointing out where some of the issues in your current places where your current bylaw might conflict with the MBTA community guidelines, and also there's a few other considerations that don't directly affect the unit count, which is the primary concern of this Excel model that we've been working with. But there's issues like, do you want to have a mandatory percentage of units set aside for, as affordable units? And there's a whole set of, there's a cap on it. You can only do 10%. If you want to go over 10%, you have to do a economic feasibility study. So again, that is a town policy decision, but we'll point out areas in which the town does need to make those policy decisions. So that's what is to come. So I'll stop sharing for now. I can put it back up if you have questions about any of the visuals I showed, but that is your summary of what we have been up to.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thanks, Tyler.
What do you have to add to that,
So
Pat?
I guess to just summarize, when we're looking at this endeavor in general, I think you're looking at it in a few parts. You're looking at it in terms of trying to identify an appropriate location, something that meets those minimum requirements in terms of acreage, in terms of proximity to a transit station, in terms of maintaining a minimum dwelling units per acre build out, as well as zoning for that minimum build out requirement, which is 1,506 units of 1,506 units. So that component has been valuable from Barry Planning, because there's a lot of, I don't want to say math, but there is a lot of mathematics and thought that goes into developing the zoning and finding a location and tweaking such things in the dimensional regulations to give you that hypothetical build out scenario. So ideally, looking at Walpole and just looking at where we already allow for mixed use of a pretty high density, our downtown is already compliant in terms of acreage. It's at around less than 62 acres, I believe, Tyler?
Yeah, it's about 62.
So we're compliant in terms of acreage. We're compliant in terms of proximity to the train station, all within a half mile. The one thing that we're not compliant with currently within the zoning is we don't allow multifamily by right. It's only mixed use, so there's a requirement to have that commercial component. And then through the calculations Barrett Planning has been able to do for us, we can't really, I guess I would say you were able to find some sort of minimum build out, but it's hard to really determine a minimum build out because the way we calculate density in our central business district is fairly unique. And what I mean by that is there's that whole requirement that you have a commercial component. And so your residential component is 3.5 times the square footage of that commercial component. Whereas with most other towns, there's a dwelling units per acre calculation or a FAR, floor area ratio. So there's a more set in place way of determining density with that form of calculating density. So in order to do this overlay district, we're going to have to try to tweak it to find a model that works for us. And so looking at a few other locations, such as a northern portion of the downtown, looking at the mall property, thinking of East Walpole in general, we're thinking of ways of, well, do we want to look into spreading out the density? And so by doing that, we have maybe more palatable number for town meeting members. So you have 1,500 units. Do you want them zoned entirely within one location, or can you think of a way to maybe disperse that number? But in doing that, you need to find a way to both disperse but not have an area that's too large where you can't maintain that 15 dwelling units per acre number. So we're still tweaking that, as Tyler said, to try to like pinpoint locations. And really, this is kind of like a great exercise internally for us to just, before we can move it forward, have an idea of what locations really work and have been tested. And from there, as Tyler mentioned, writing the zoning itself is not within Barrett's scope. That is going to be an endeavor that we're going to need to undertake. Having recommendations from Barrett Planning will be helpful. There is a bevy of information already available in terms of draft zoning, and that's mostly this next phase, I would say, probably this fall, of really diving into writing the zoning itself. As Tyler mentioned, the contract with Barrett expires in September, so we're hoping to get some good information to take away from that. And not to dive into my memo a little bit, but this is one part. This is all great information, but there's a huge public interaction component that needs to be part of this process. Ideally, it's a planning process. So in terms of trying to facilitate.
Jump in. Not to interrupt Patrick, but we talked about this earlier. I think Patrick's looking for some input from the select board. Generally, other communities have started some type of a public committee where they hold discussions, outreach, and he's looking for some guidance from this board. When he and I talked, I thought it would be appropriate for it to really start with the planning board, because it's going to impact so many aspects of the zoning bylaws, and generally, the planning board sponsors that. My concern is if the planning board, they may have a lot of things to consider. If they don't have any, if they're unable to take it on, it may fall to the select board eventually to present this. Ideally, it'd be with the planning board. So I think he's looking for some direction, because we need to have this in place by the end of 2024, right, Pat?
Correct. So
the law requires.
Yes. Part of this whole process is different compliance deadlines. So if this board remembers, initially I met with you to discuss the draft guidelines. That was making us compliant for FY22. Recently, I did what's called the action plan, in terms of kind of laying out what our plan of approach is going to be to lead us towards compliance. So, as Jim said, by the end of 2024, we will want to have submitted applicable documentation to DHCD, notifying that we are in compliance. And in order to do so, obviously, we need to pass the zoning at town meeting, which really gives us two opportunities: this spring and then next fall, in order to get this done. If we don't get it done, essentially, we're not in compliance. We can't receive certain grant opportunities until we are in compliance. So that's essentially the downside of not being proactive with this project.
Okay. And thank you, Tyler. That was a great presentation, and there's a lot of information here to get through, and certainly tweaking that area to that sweet spot that is needed. So the timeline, so we need some public input. Have we sought out to planning board this idea yet, or not?
No.
No. Okay. So I guess that's really kind of on our end. The next step that needs to happen is that to engage planning board to see if that public outreach.
And I know Patrick's reached out to Kate, their assistant, and didn't she say there might be some availability on one of the meetings?
Yeah, I spoke to Kate. I think I spoke to Mr. Chekarowski, who's on the planning board. He had reached out about it as well. And so whatever they have availability, I'm happy to go meet with them to discuss. I don't think I've discussed with them guidelines yet either, so it might be a good opportunity to really go over this initiative.
And then again, time-wise of town meeting, having articles ready for either spring or fall
Yeah,
and have it done.
it's pretty important. And I know they're going after towns, maybe Tyler could weigh in on this one, who are ignoring this. I think, was it Westwood?
Yeah, Westwood
Took some action against them, might have gotten their attention.
Westwood didn't submit their action plan. They just said, "Oh, we're good," and they basically said, "Now you need to submit an action plan," and that's why they're technically not in compliance this year and can't apply for certain grant funding. But
Do any members of the board have any other questions concerning this presentation?
Can I just clarify, what are we asking the planning board? Are we looking for them to appoint an advisory committee?
We're looking for them to take, I would, as the town administrator, say, we're looking for them to be the lead on this one.
Okay, to be the lead, to appoint an advisory committee, or they would be the
They
advisory?
could be.
They are the advisory.
The makeup of those 5 members
Yeah.
would advise, okay? Yeah, that makes sense.
All right.
Are you actually on an agenda for the planning board yet?
no.
I would encourage you to get on the agenda quickly. I think this is an important issue.
Yeah.
It's mandated. This is not something we can play around with from the state's perspective. I would think that the planning board, this is right up their alley, and I would think they would want to be the driver of this process. If it turns out that they don't want to drive the process, then I think we're going to have to drive the process, so, which
No, that's
probably is
correct.
not the ideal way to do it, but, I think that'd be great to go to planning board, get on the agenda. Let's see where they stand and what they're willing to, what they would like to do about it. And, the backup is, I guess we would have to pick that up, so.
I mean, the timeline is the timeline, can't be ignored, and it's, a lot of work has gone into this already, and we'll need to go into it as the fall comes, and writing the articles and getting that information out.
And I think we do need to get the word, we collectively, the town, out to the general public. I think the commercial business district is the right place to be doing this. I do like looking at other areas in towns to pick up maybe the other 25%, but
Yeah, it's still.
I think you're on the right track.
I think maybe the point that, and you guys, it was kind of buried in that presentation, but, so the CBD is the place to do this, but because you can't require commercial districts to be part of this, to be part of the zoning, you would want to rewrite it to create kind of those incentives. Am I explaining that right?
No, so we would probably want to keep the existing underlying zoning, so the central
it'd be an
business
overlay.
district remain, it'd be an overlay,
That
so.
was rewritten to create, did I hear this right? To create incentives to allow for commercial to continue to be built
Well-
with residential above it, but we wouldn't require it.
Technically, you can still follow the underlying zoning if you want to develop a mixed-use project
Okay.
at the density that we currently requirement.
Oh, I
If
understand.
we're going to write the zoning for the overlay district, we would want to obviously have multifamily included in there in terms of a type of use, but obviously we'd want to keep mixed use as well.
Right.
But the underlying zoning still remains.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
We were discussing that earlier just because it's hard to kind of beat the way we calculate density right now in the downtown. But
Good.
yeah.
That's positive.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Tyler, for joining us this evening and going through this with us.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
You too.
Thanks, Tyler.
The next item on the agenda tonight is talking about the accessory dwelling unit bylaw article that Patrick has been working on and brought to us at the last meeting. A significant amount of work has gone into this, and Patrick, I'd like to thank you for all the time and effort you put in and taking our feedback and kind of tweaking it and making some adjustments since our last meeting. Does anyone else have any other questions to add to this
I would just say that I was pretty vocal on this last time, and I wanted to, number one, thank you, Patrick, for taking another look at this and coming back with which I think is a really good set of rules now. I struggled with the question of, how do we figure out how to define who can be in the unit at what time? And one of the things that I've concluded over the last 2 weeks is that if you're not careful, you can end up with a very wide range of use cases, I'll call them. And I'm not sure that's our intent. I would be opposed to unrestricted, which is one of the options that you explored in your memo to us. So I'm liking very much at this point landing on the two that we discussed last time, which is the kinship requirement and the over 55. I like reducing it from the 62 to the over 55. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. So I like that a lot. I also like less bureaucracy around the attestation going from the 1 year to the 2 year. So I think that makes a big difference as well. I support the by right aspect of this, although I suspect that'll become a point of discussion as we go through the process, and we'll need to be ready to discuss that. But I actually think that we've landed in a very good spot here, and as I said in my note to you, I fully support what you've got written at this time, and I want to thank you for all the energy you've put into this, and really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other members want to speak to this?
I would just say the same thing. I agree. I think we're now in a good spot. I like this the way it is. So I'm going to fully support it and, would love to see it move forward, so.
And I too, at this time, I appreciate the changes that you've made, the 55 as right, biannual, kinship. I think those are all great points to go forward with this. I'm hoping that this has the support and has support at town meeting, so I'm comfortable with it, how it is. Ready for a motion?
I'd make a motion to sponsor the accessory dwelling unit bylaw amendment and add to the fall 2023 town meeting warrant.
I'll second it.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have a vote, 500.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have one more item to quickly, Patrick, are you doing this one too? Including the,
Your 10 comment, the Main Street Lives request.
Yep. Main Street Live, it's back. So similar scenario, format, location. This is gonna be September 15th, that Friday, third Friday in September. Since I've been here, it's very impressive how the EDC runs that. It's a great event. I think they do a great job. I want to say we have 8 food trucks lined up so far. So that group has done a great job in terms of planning this and putting it on. So very happy to help them out whenever I can.
very exciting. All right, I think everyone is in favor of this. Ben, have a motion on this one?
I'd make a motion to approve the request to use the town common, which includes the closure of Elm Street and a portion of West Street, and a one-day entertainment permit on September 15th, 2023, as part of Main Street Live.
I'll second that.
Any second? Everyone in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have a vote, 500. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It is now at the time of 8:15. We're a little bit past our scheduled time for open forum, but I welcome anyone here for open forum to come up and speak. Come on up, Mr. Hamilton. I think you were it for tonight.
I came to hear about the MBTA planning, but I would like to say, we need water, and we need water for the MBTA plan. And the way to get it is a reservoir. The sludge dump is in the Correction Department security zone. That means it's going to have bulldozers, truck deliveries, dump truck deliveries, and crews working in that. They're going to probably need a shed also to wash the bulldozers off. So, turning it into a reservoir would be ideal. For Walpole, it would give us more water, and it would be less intrusion into the security zone for the prison complex. And we could provide water to the prison complex from that reservoir, to Norfolk and Rentham, who both need water. And I would hope that the select board would consider taking that area, that 94 acres from the MWRA, which is private property and pays taxes to Walpole. Therefore, it can be taken by eminent domain. if it reverts back to the correction department, it's lost. We can't take it by eminent domain, it's public property. So I would hope that the select board would consider acting on that sooner than later, because you're going to need more water for these projects you're talking about. And it would be a shame to lose the only spot that I can locate for another for a reservoir in Walpole. I looked at the Allen Dam, it's got a highway through it, it's polluted, it can't be used. So this is the last chance in Walpole to get more water. We don't have another reservoir, we don't have another aquifer that we could dig into, and we lost the next site for our well field, which was built on by the preserve. So I hope you consider that, because we desperately need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Anyone else here for open forum? If not, we will now move on to new business. The next up item is the annual town election article for town meeting warrant.
So this is something Liz, myself, and town council have been working on. We've gone ahead and changed the dates as we discussed to the third Tuesday in May. It's ready to go, and I just wanted to have it on the agenda and make sure the board was comfortable sponsoring it. It covers everything we discussed, and Lauren added something in there. If there's a state of emergency, we can change it just to cover us. We learned during COVID we have to pivot, so it covers us.
Certainly. Does anyone have any follow-up questions concerning
Do you
this?
expect that would take effect this year, or have you discussed that at all? I'm not, when I say this year, I mean next May.
I don't, it would be great if it did, Glenn, but
Maybe.
it could get held up with the legislature.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Just checking.
All right, and then, and I think we're ready for a motion on this one.
I'd make a motion to sponsor a fall town meeting article, changing the annual town election to the third Tuesday in May.
I'll second that.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have a vote, 500. The next item is the bid or contract for the town hall entrance repair.
Sure, this is something that Don's been plugging away on. Obviously, with the funds the board appropriated back some months ago, up to $300,000 for the town hall, the old town hall. So he's been picking away at it, and this is just one of the next items on his list here. So I'd recommend favorable action for bid contract number 2023-29 to Nealon Construction Corp., based in Medford, Mass., with their lowest price of $37,500.
All right, do we have a motion for this?
I'd make a motion to award the bid contract 2023-29 to Nealand Construction Corp.
I'll second that.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have a vote, 500. Next item is consent agenda.
On our agenda, is number 3 under the consent agenda actually a new business item?
No, so we had a discussion with the chair and vice chair a couple of weeks ago.
So I'll just read it as part of the consent
Read it as
agenda?
part of the consent
Okay,
agenda,
all
yeah.
right,
Sorry.
I thought you were throwing me a curveball there. Okay, so I would make a motion to approve the consent agenda items as listed on the August 1st agenda, including various donors to Night Before the Fourth gift account, Ravi Adanki to the Walpole Fire gift account, and the request of Brian Cullinane for a block party on Lewis Ave on September 30th, 2023 from 2 to 10 p.m.
I'll second that.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have a vote, 500, and up next is the town administrator's update.
Sure, just a few items here. National Night Out, I think they might be shutting down out there, but I just wanted to give kudos to the rec department. They're doing a great job with their programming out there. I walked around earlier tonight, and even though it was early, it was still well attended. Lauren, Brendan, and the entire team over there at the rec department continued to do a great job all throughout the summer, so just a kudos to them. The warrant, we're set to close it the next meeting on August 22nd. Right now, there are about 23 articles, and we continue to kind of work our way through everything. For the FY24 budget and town meeting, the state budget process is just about finalized. We get the final cherry sheet numbers today. They still have to be ratified and signed by the governor, but it looks like we're in line for about an extra $1.5 million, which is what we had thought. We were just being cautious on that. My likely recommendation is going to be that a majority of that goes towards the capital stabilization fund to help offset the cost of the high school. I do expect some tweaks in the budget will be needed. I know the school department has mentioned they look like they need an extra 200 or so thousand. I'd like to park about 100 or so in the reserve fund. There's a couple of smaller budgets like Norfolk County Aggie that was off by about 12 or 15,000. Came in a little higher than, so not much, but so we're going to work through that. I expect that we'll have some recommendations towards the end of this month once we know for sure what the budget is, and once we get free cash certified. Jody's working through that. She's actually closing out Munis altogether tomorrow, working with Mike Donovan, and she's pretty close to having everything finalized to be ready to be submitted to the state. Capital's in. Again, just waiting for free cash on this one, and continue to work through that. I know Chairman Fosberg and the Capital Budget Committee is looking forward to getting those recommendations. That's it.
Anyone have any other questions? Yep.
I just have one, Jim. I know we just talked with Pat, and I know that you and Patrick Shield and Pat DeShane, and then these consultants have done a considerable amount of work on the MBTA communities and even this other, accessory dwelling unit bylaw. But I just asked Jim to, keep us appraised of how that's going with the planning board, because as we all said here, we can't afford to lose any time at all. So if we need to get involved in some way, or even if to have a joint meeting with the planning board, just let us know what you need from us.
100%,
yeah.
definitely.
Thank you.
All right, then at this time, I think we're ready for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We have a vote, 5-0-0. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening.